My name is James, and I am the Vice President of the Epsilon chapter of Eta Sigma Phi here at the University of Iowa. We organize this lecture series as a fun way for all of us to celebrate the little things in classics that bring us joy and to share that joy with others. Our speaker tonight is Dr. Jeremy Swist. Dr. Swist is an instructor in the Department of Classics and Modern Languages at Xavier University and a lecturer in the Department of Philosophy and Classics at the University of Texas, San Antonio. He earned his BA in History and Latin from the University of Maine and his MA and PhD in Classics from the University of Iowa with a dissertation on the reception of the Seven Kings of Rome in the historiography of the Roman Empire. His other publications range from Greek declamation in late antiquity to the writings of the Emperor Julian to the reception of Greece, Rome, and Byzantium in heavy metal music. Dr. Swist's talk, An Unholy Trinity, Antiquity, Heavy Metal, and White Supremacy, will explore and deconstruct the reception of ancient Greek and Roman history, culture, and art by elements within the world heavy metal scene and that promote far-right, neo-fascist, and white supremacist ideologies. If you have any questions, we ask that you hold them until the end of the presentation when we will have a bit of time for Q&A. And I will hand it over to Dr. Swist.
All right, thank you, James, and thank you, Deb, and thank you, Hannah, for inviting me and setting this all up. Thanks to everyone coming, especially to people in the UK and Europe who are living after midnight and rocking to the dawn. So I appreciate you coming for this. All right, I'm going to share my screen and hopefully this all works out. There we go. Okay, I'll make this go away. All righty. All right, so yeah, once again, this talk for advertising purposes is called An Unholy Trinity, Classics, Heavy Metal, and White Supremacy. So why don't we dive in? Whoops. Okay. On Saturday, January 30th, the Xavier University campus here in Cincinnati was attacked by a white nationalist group that destroyed anti-racist signage. They put up stickers with such slogans as "Reclaim America" and "Conquered, not stolen." The perpetrators of this attack were the neo-fascist group Patriot Front. My colleagues and I addressed this incident in our classes the following Monday, specifically the group's appropriation of the rhetoric and symbolism of ancient Rome. Their logo displays the fasces, a bundle of rods with an axe head attached, carried by the bodyguard of Roman consuls and later emperors. The fasces symbolize not only imperial authority, but the threat of violence against those who would defy it. We also discussed how the group's manifesto, written around the election of Donald Trump, used the collapse of the Roman Republic and its transformation into an autocracy as a prescriptive paradigm for contemporary America. Quote, "America was built in the image of the Roman Republic. Democracy has failed in this once great nation. Now the time for a new Caesar to revive the American spirit has dawned." Such fascist rhetoric is not unique to Patriot Front, but has also been used by the alt-right icon Richard Spencer, whose vision of a white American ethno-state is, quote, "a reconstitution of the Roman Empire." Patriot Front's attack brought home to Cincinnati the trauma of our collective witnessing of the insurrection at the US Capitol earlier that month. Among the various images captured by the media, which included several insurrectionists brandishing symbols and slogans of ancient Rome and Sparta, was this photo of Jon Schaffer, the lead guitarist and songwriter of Iced Earth, a well-known and popular metal band. As far as I could tell, most Iced Earth fans hadn't realized just how much and for how long Schaffer bought in to far-right ideologies and conspiracy theories. I only found out myself when researching metal's reception of Sparta 2 years ago, when I discovered Schaffer's solo project, Sons of Liberty, which back in 2011 recorded a song, Molon Labe, a lionizing account of the Battle of Thermopylae that pretty much plagiarizes the script of 300 in all its notorious ahistoricity. Seeing his picture from January 6th, it all made perfect sense. Schaffer is not alone when it comes to the intersection of antiquity, heavy metal, and right-wing extremism. Now, the theme of these invited talks is technically the little things in ancient studies that make us smile and bring us joy. The trinity I'd rather smile about is that of metal, classics, and fluffy kitty cats. The phenomenon I'm about to describe may be in some respects a little thing, but it is nothing to smile about. In the context of the tens of thousands of artists and millions of fans in a global, diverse, and inclusive heavy metal scene, far-right bands are in the minority, and an even smaller subset of these engage with the ancient world. What does bring me joy, however, is that in documenting and deconstructing these appropriations, I am gratifying a sense of purpose as both a classicist and a metalhead to serve both of these communities through public scholarship committed to social justice, and through acknowledging that the phenomenon I discuss tonight is in certain respects a logical extension of the European and patriarchal roots of both the field of classics and the genre and culture of metal. To only write off these extremists as little things, as anomalous fringe elements that are not representative of today's heavy metal scene, is to ignore the white patriarchal foundations of both metal and classics. The mythology and history of Greece and Rome has inspired metal bands since the 80s, and this form of classical reception has by now proliferated worldwide. Hundreds of artists have adapted classical topics for thousands of individual tracks, scores of albums, and even the defining concept of dozens of bands. Within the past few decades, metal music has also become the object of serious academic study, with metal studies conferences, journals, and monographs. The study of classical reception in metal soon followed, with, at this point, a handful of peer-reviewed articles and an edited volume. As it was around the same time that both metal and classics began corrupting my youth back in high school, it was perhaps inevitable that my two worlds would one day collide. So how have we philological metalheads accounted for this phenomenon? In his seminal article on the topic in Selecta Classica, Osman Umarhan concludes that, quote, metal's appropriation of Greek and Roman antiquity in terms of aggression, struggle for power, and masculinity speaks predominantly to a youth culture that uses the medium of metal as a platform for its general angst and feelings of alienation from contemporary society, and thereby seeks to mark its own place in society, end quote. Christian Gierslev adds that figures such as Achilles and Alexander are, quote, popular paradigms and models for the idealized masculine figure of the heroic past, end quote. However, while demographically the metal scene is still disproportionately male, the plethora of songs sympathetic to figures such as Boudica and Zenobia and others show that antiquity appeals to women in the scene as well. Gierslev also argues that icons like Alexander in particular channel pride in national heritage. This quality is fundamental to the subgenre of Greek, Italian, and other regional bands coined by KFB Fletcher as Mediterranean metal, a counterpart to the Viking metal of Scandinavia. As I myself have argued, pagan Greece and persecuting Rome have been viewed by metal bands as attractive counterpoints to a Christianity they identify with contemporary systems of morality and authority from which they rebel. These scholarly conclusions combine in explaining the appeal of antiquity as a realm of escapism to, and nostalgia for, a bygone age of authenticity and martial power perceived as diminished, lost, or even suppressed by modern-day institutions. Thus, narratives of gods, heroes, soldiers, conquerors, and emperors comprise the majority of the discography of heavy metal's classical reception. Metal, especially its subgenres of black metal and death metal, is extreme music, defined musically by extremes of volume, dissonance, speed, and technicality. With its roots in shock rock, metal's lyrical content is often extreme as well, exploring the extremes of violence, debauchery, and evil. Moreover, a high priority is placed on transgression and rebellion from the collective, and fantasies of violence and empowerment acted out in a safe and healthy way. Think of the therapeutic effects of a Greek tragedy or a video game like Rome Total War. As with early punk acts like the Sex Pistols and Susie and the Banshees, fascist imagery symbolized transgression for its own sake. But it wasn't long before actual fascists infiltrated the scene, prompting the Dead Kennedys in 1981 to proclaim, Nazi punks, fuck off. The fact is, extreme music can attract extreme people, And while punk and hardcore have become havens for the far left, metal has to a small but not insignificant extent become a vehicle for far-right ideologies. These include bands formed by avowed neo-Nazis, collectively known as National Socialist Black Metal, or NSBM for short. According to the Metal Archives database, out of the over 100,000 bands that have formed since the 70s, only 725 have National Socialism listed as a lyrical theme. Many more beyond these, however, can be identified as openly racist and ultranationalist. Some use far-right messages and imagery, but claim that such elements are misinterpreted and disavow allegations of racism by claiming that their music has, quote, nothing to do with politics. While such bands are a clear minority, many of them are nevertheless prominent, such as the Finnish band Satanic Warmaster, whose Facebook page has over 300,000 subscribers. It's unlikely that most of these fans are card-carrying Nazis or white supremacists. A staggering number of metalheads evaluate bands solely on their music, ignoring lyrical content. Even when these fans are aware of this content, they convince themselves they can separate the art from the artist. Debates over this attitude are not infrequent within the scene and have at times erupted into acrimony over cancellations of concerts or tours in light of evidence or allegations of far-right sympathies. Metal's traditional rejection of modernity can sometimes lead to a conservative embrace of tradition. For a counterculture that has traditionally consisted of mostly white men and women in Europe, North America, and Oceania, that tradition can include the hegemonic construct rooted in ancient Greece and Rome, known as Western civilization. While most perceive this as an anodyne, albeit reductive term to distinguish Europe's cultural legacy from that of the East or global South, proponents of the alt-right and ultra-conservatives, such as Iowa Congressman Steve King, employ the term as a dog whistle for white colonial supremacy. Far-right metal bands who appropriate Greco-Roman antiquity often do so in the interest of reviving, preserving, and defending Western civilization from multiculturalism, socialism, and sometimes Judaism. Similarly to the atheistic Spencerian alt-right, these bands also oppose Christianity as a foreign Eastern intruder, an extension of Judaism, in other words. This partly explains their attraction to polytheist Greece and pre-Constantinian Rome, and their attraction to neo-pagan and neo-Hellenic religions. The second wave of black metal itself arose in the early 1990s from the ashes of Norwegian churches torched as symbols of a foreign religion that had erased Norse traditions. I have documented dozens of bands that arguably use antiquity for far-right extremist agendas, some of which are prominent not only in NSBM, but in the extreme metal scene at large. Tonight, I'll discuss a few. The Greek NSBM band Der Stürmer, the Polish NSBM adjacent bands, Graveland and Kataxu, and the problematic Australian band Destroyer 666, as well as Diocletian from New Zealand. With the goal of restoring the pre-Christian glory of white Europe, these artists arguably envision their cause as a resurrection of the pagan gods, Spartan warriors, and the Roman Empire. They mix classical with fascist imagery, themes and imagery such as black suns, swastikas, and, most frequently, wolves. Why wolves? As Amanda DeJoya has demonstrated, lupine and lycanthropic themes have long been popular in metal, embraced as a symbol of fear, sexual liberation, and identity between musicians and fans as a wolf pack. Nor are wolves inherently a far-right symbol. According to ecologist Stephanie Rutherford, to certain indigenous American cultures, such as the Anishinaabe, wolves are positive role models for human social behavior, while to white settlers, they represented a threat to colonization and agriculture, a threat that had to be extirpated. This persecution, coupled with the bogus notion of the alpha male, partly accounts for wolves' adoption as identity symbols by certain alt-right groups. And Rutherford says, in her own words, quote, rather than upending wolf lore, the alt-right crystallizes it, deploying what are thought to be its contradictory elements into a coherent political narrative of white persecution and male domination. For the Wolves of Vinland and La Meute, they are the only ones brave enough to see the truth and brutal enough to do anything about it. The rest of us are sheep, domesticated into mindlessly gobbling up the pasture of multiculturalism, globalism, and feminism. The wolf, then, is the perfect symbol for the assertion of new kinds of nationalisms and tribalisms. It's the predator the alt-right needs to lead a cleansing of what they see as a weak and injured social body. Quote. Wolves were also popular with Hitler and the Third Reich. Various SS battalions used the Wolfsangel, still common among neo-Nazi and alt-right groups today. In the case of these bands, wolf identity also links them to ancient Sparta and Rome, especially the latter as the descendants of the founders Romulus and Remus, who, according to legend, were nursed by a she-wolf and later formed a society of outcasts. These bands' classicizing lycanthropic agendas seek to realign the social hierarchy with the animal food chain. We begin with Der Stürmer. Greece has a thriving metal scene, whose bands frequently and proudly connect with their heritage through songs based on myth, religion, and history. Some groups, such as Coir, are active devotees of Neo-Hellenism, which has thousands of adherents in the country. Far-right Greek bands combine the revival of Hellenic dodecatheism with the racist and anti-immigrant agendas of far-right groups such as the political party Golden Dawn, whose members gather annually at Thermopylae to commemorate the last stand of Leonidas and the 300 against the Persian invasion. Der Stürmer are registered members of Golden Dawn. Formed in Athens in 1998, they are one of the most popular bands in the NSBM scene. Their name is borrowed from that of the anti-Jewish newspaper published in Germany from 1923 to 1924. Der Stürmer's website outlines not a Germanic, but a pan-European ethno-nationalist agenda. Quote, the message of Der Stürmer is a pan-European one. The Hellene and the Roman, the Nordic, the Slav, and the Celt. All we are brothers from the same womb and from the same blood. Our race is one, the Indo-European one. Our fatherland is one, it has 100 flags. Europe. Der Stürmer's marriage of Nazism and classical antiquity is conspicuous in their lyrics and artwork, which I'll discuss first. Their earliest use of classical art is their 2002 EP, Iron Will and Discipline, which features a statue of Leonidas erected in modern Sparti in 1968. The statue and the EP's title associates Sparta with the ideals of Nazism and 20th century fascism. The March of the Iron Will was a symbolic capture of the Ethiopian capital Addis Ababa by fascist Italy in 1936. Iron Will also evokes the 1935 German propaganda film Triumph of the Will. Discipline refers to the intense military training and education for which the Spartans were famous. The Third Reich's education system included textbooks that presented Sparta as a model Aryan, Philkish state. Der Stürmer's 2004 release, titled Once and Again Plundering the Zion, features the south inner panel of the triumphal arch in Rome dedicated to the Emperor Titus, which includes a relief sculpture of Titus's triumph in 71 CE, celebrating his suppression of the Jewish revolt. It prominently parades the menorah plundered from the Second Temple during the sack of Jerusalem. The arch has been a symbol of triumph over Judaism ever since. This artwork and title suggests the desire to emulate Titus's offensive in the present day. Next, their 2006 record, A Banner Greater Than Death, uses a photo of the Wehrmacht flag planted in front of the Parthenon to mark the Axis occupation of Greece in 1941. Their choice of photo suggests the continuity between classical Greece and the Third Reich. Finally, their 2007 record, Si Vis Pacem Parabellum, features a 3rd century BCE sculpted metope of the sun god Helios from the temple of Athena at Ilium. The record's title is Latin for If You Want Peace, Prepare for War, adapted from the late Roman military writer Vegetius, which has been used to justify militarism. It was popularized by the Nazis with the production of the Pistola Parabellum, better known as the Luger pistol. The artwork refers to the song Smintheus, He Who Beheads the Serpent. Smintheus is an epithet of Apollo invoked by the Trojan priest Chryses at the beginning of Homer's Iliad in order to bring down plague upon the Greek camp. The song adapts the myth of Apollo, commonly syncretized with Helios since the classical period, slaying the Python and establishing his oracle at Delphi. The first stanza goes, quote, on chariot arrived from the Hyperborean land, true lord of the Delphic temple, once you expelled an eastern god. killed with your spear the great serpent, end quote. Ancient accounts are unanimous that Apollo slew Python with arrows and not a spear. This is possibly a de-Christianizing tactic whereby Apollo usurps the iconography of the Orthodox St. George, slaying a dragon with a lance. As for the Hyperborean land, the track later calls Apollo the Hyperborean god of brightness. In Greek myth, Hyperborea is a distant land beyond the north wind and home to a race of giants to where Apollo left Delphi for the winter. Pindar describes Hyperborea as a utopia where the arts flourished and everyone was free from old age, disease, toil, and war. The Nazis were influenced by Friedrich Nietzsche's identification of his sympathetic readers as Hyperboreans at the beginning of his work, The Antichrist, where he quotes Pindar, as well as by Helena Blavatsky's anti-Darwinian theory of the Hyperborean origins of the human race that subsequently devolved. The ancient Greek chronicler Hecataeus reports a legend that Apollo had been born in Hyperborea rather than Delos, and that he was the Hyperboreans' chief god. Der Stürmer subscribed to this version in order to tie Apollo ethnically to the Aryan race. The Nazis' appropriation of solar symbols such as the swastika and the sun wheel, or the black sun — Apollo is mentioned in the song as father of the black sun — reflects their belief that the ancient Aryans were sun worshippers. No extant version of the myth of Apollo and Python claims that he came to Delphi from Hyperborea, nor is there any mention in the ancient sources that Python, or the goddesses of the oracle he supplanted, as mentioned by Aeschylus, came from the east. The band's purpose in crafting the myth this way becomes clear later in the song. Quote, "Inseminate the plague with your arrows once more. Wrath of the serpent slayer, Hyperborean god of brightness. Drive your arrows for one more time, nor for us. Restore once again what is rightfully yours." End quote. Invoking Apollo as plague bringer, like in the Iliad, Der Stürmer call on him to retake Greece from the eastern serpent. The album's title, Si Vis Pacem Parabellum, also suggests such a call to arms. Still, other songs glorify historical oppressors of Judaism and channel their spirit in a renewed fight against it. In Desemitizer, the singer takes on the persona of the aforementioned triumphator, quote, "I am Titus Flavius Vespasianus, mighty general of Rome. I ravage and pillage whatever those rats call their home," end quote. Similarly, the song Antiochus Antitheos praises the Seleucid king Antiochus IV Epiphanes, whose persecution of the Jews sparked the Maccabean revolt in 167 BCE that successfully threw off Hellenistic hegemony. Antitheos in modern Greek means godless, but in Homeric Greek means godlike, and in Koine Greek means against God or a hostile deity. The song calls on Antiochus to rise from the deepest halls of Hades in order to exact his fiery revenge. In the song Megale Hellas, Der Stürmer mimic the Spartans and Alexander in their dream of founding a Fourth Reich. The title is the ancient Greek name of the Latin Magna Graecia, or Greater Greece, the region of Greek colonies in southern Italy and Sicily. However, the track's lyrics suggest that the title is rather a Hellenic version of Großdeutschland, Greater Germany, which Nazi Germany called its territory starting with the annexation of Austria in 1938. Quote, "Like the Spartans and Alexander the Great, we'll never surrender, fight to the grave. The golden dawn will rise in homelands unredeemed. The great Hellenic Empire again we will build," end quote. The band's allegiance to the Golden Dawn Party is here combined with a wish to not only cast their enemies out of Greece like the Spartans, but also to rebuild the empire of Alexander and rule the inferior races. Der Stürmer's most well-known song, finally, is a commemoration of Thermopylae, those who lived and died like heroes. A YouTube video of the song, which is set to stills from the film 300, has garnered over 30,000 views since it was posted in 2009. Though the lyrics are about Thermopylae, the song begins with a sample from the film Gladiator, in which Maximus addresses his Roman troops as they are about to face the Marcomanni, ending with the line, "What we do in life echoes in eternity." The sample from another clash between a classical army and barbarians anticipates the song's conclusion that the strength, loyalty, and honor of the 300 earned them immortality. I will next discuss two Polish bands I dub NSBM adjacent, Graveland from Wrocław and Kataksu from Warsaw. Poland is a predominantly Catholic nation, but the past 3 decades have seen Slavic neo-paganism swell to several thousand adherents. Some far-right groups have rejected Catholicism and embraced the old gods. Such groups have at least sympathetic ties to members of Poland's thriving black metal scene, ever since the formation of the band Graveland by Rob Darkin Fudali in 1991. Their lyrics, while containing anti-Christian elements standard in the subgenre, focus primarily on Celtic, Slavic, and Norse religion and mythology. However, the band is often labeled as NSBM due to the outspoken politics of Darkin, who was on record praising Hitler and Aryanism. Notably, he styles himself, quote, a forerunner of the era of rebirth of paganism, rebirth of pagan Aryan empire, end quote. Graveland have one song that references Sparta, Born for War, on their 1995 album, Thousand Swords, which is often ranked a classic of the black metal subgenre at large. In Born for War, the narrator recalls a childhood in which he was cast into the elements and trained to kill Christians by a cruel lord in order to become future warriors, future wolves. Near the end of the song, he declares, quote, I know the true code of life, Spartan way of life, and draconian laws. I've grown as a warrior, close to nature, close to roots, end quote. He compares his upbringing to Sparta's brutal state-sponsored education, the agoge, and his killing of Christians to the ritual terrorizing of Laconian slaves called helots, known as the Crypteia. Graveland's combination of pagan ties to nature, Spartan ethics, and wolf identity are logical extensions of Darkin's Neo-Aryan ideology. The symphonic black metal band Kataksu formed in 1994. Like Graveland, Kataksu are NSBM adjacent because their lyrical themes are not explicitly National Socialist, but their founding member, Piotr Piątek, has also formed the NSBM band Sunwheel, which itself has lyrics that retroject policies of ethnic cleansing onto Imperial Rome. Quote, hideous race, you've awoken the death machine which nothing and no one will stop, from the times of ancient Rome through the chimneys of death until nowadays, end quote. Kataksu's lyrics are not quite that explicit, but still advocate an imperial pagan revival, though we may note also the inverted cross combined with the Volksangel. Their 2005 song, The Manifesto of the Unity, envisions a coming golden age when the old gods and their devotees will reclaim their supremacy. Quote, if the fall of the hound's faith is near, if the wrath of the pantheon still hears its flame at the corners of the world, let's throw a shadow of crystal murders. You will stand like before underneath the whip of ancient Rome. In the frantic laugh of Sparta, I will push your brood off the mountain. This is the wolf era of truth amongst the burning of sanctuaries lies, end quote. The heathen gods' nemesis are here referred to as hounds, while the band identify their coming dominion as that of wolves, drawing a contrast between those who are domesticated and those who retain their authentic predatory wildness. The gods' revenge is paralleled by crystal murders, a thinly veiled allusion to Kristallnacht, the 1938 anti-Jewish pogrom carried out by Nazi paramilitary groups. Amidst this lupine rhetoric, Kataksu threatened their foes with subjugation and extermination under a Spartano-Roman Empire reborn, hurling them off Mount Taygetus into the pit of Caius, where the Spartans allegedly cast infants deemed physically unfit, as well as traitors and prisoners of war. In restoring the natural hierarchy, Kataksu associates Spartan eugenics with modern ethnic cleansing. I will now shift to bands that I would not classify as NSBM or NSBM adjacent, but for their evident racism or ties to neo-Nazism, I accept the suggested label of problematic. The black and thrash metal band Destroyer 666 was formed in Melbourne, Australia in 1994 by Keith Bemrose, aka KK Warslut. Since 2000, the band has been signed to the major label Season of Mist, toured worldwide, and amassed over 110,000 followers on Facebook. On their page, they describe themselves as, quote, a nonprofit organization dedicated to the dispersal of ideas of lycanthropy, nihilism, and minimalism, end quote. In other words, Destroyer's philosophy is more atavistic than fascistic, defying all forms of authority. Yet there is still an undercurrent of racial tribalism. In 2019, Destroyer's Australia and New Zealand tour, scheduled a month after the Christchurch shooting, was canceled in light of evidence of racist, Islamophobic, and misogynistic statements Bemrose made during past concerts. Despite his denials, Warslut's racism is also evident in his music. The 1997 song Unchain the Wolves is a call to arms for the werewolf blood and wolves of war to rise up against the religion that had oppressed them since Europe had been Christianized. With the following lines, it becomes clear who these lycanthropes are. Quote, "When the scourge of the cross fell upon our land, they took the occult magic of the white man. Now in this age of iron, when the end is near." End quote. Destroyer echo Hesiod's works and days in suggesting that pre-Christian Europe was an age of gold that declined into the present age of iron, soon even to be blotted out by Zeus. Later on come the inflammatory lines, "Can you see the swastika turning? Can you see the world burning?" Destroyer claimed the inheritance of Rome in the track The Calling from their 2002 album Cold Steel for an Iron Age. The song is an invitation to all kindred spirits who seek to violently disrupt society. Quote, "Gather round, all you fire starters, whirlwind reapers and comet riders. Come, sons of Remus, the beast now calls, wolf-sire children, daughters of Rome, come," end quote. Destroyer forged a continuity of bloodline between their movement and Rome, itself founded by Romulus and Remus, who were mythically nursed by a she-wolf. As sons of Remus, they identify specifically with the rebel and transgressor against even Romulus's authority. It may also be noted that on the back of the 2011 reissue of Cold Steel features the Capitoline wolf standing atop the globe and suckling a great number of snakes. Destroyer appropriate Rome's foundation myth to rally together a single wolf pack and take on the world. The final band I'll discuss tonight are Diocletian, a black and death metal band formed in Auckland, New Zealand in 2004. They take their name from the Roman emperor famous for the so-called Great Persecution of Christians at the turn of the 4th century CE. Their lyrics concern war, blasphemy, and a radical form of Hobbesian realpolitik. Songs such as Nuclear Wolves, as well as their artwork, also demonstrate their militant lycanthropy. The smoking gun of their ties to white supremacism is their track Werewolf Directive, off their 2009 record Doom Cult, which includes the lines, quote, "Progeny of Europa, successors of struggle and pride, the rider of blood from the past now bleeds. White are the wolves that conquer the ages, and white are the bleached bones of our foes." The song could be read as a manifesto for the rebirth and resurgence of the conquistador race of Europeans and their descendants in order to halt the decline and fall of the present age. Quote, "Today is the day is created the werewolf and cast off the man. In an era where downfall is sacrosanct, we shall not fall prey to this decline." End quote. Now, Diocletian wrote the music to this song, but not the lyrics, which were written by Pete Helmkamp of the American band Angel Corps. Helmkamp is on record praising Hitler, recommending Mein Kampf, and publishing a book called The Conqueror Manifesto that argues for the supremacy of the Arya Serpent Theos race, a roughly equivalent term to Aryans and Indo-Europeans. Now, Helmkamp's ideology is his own, but nevertheless, these are the lyrics to one of Diocletian's songs, which is tantamount to platforming white supremacist rhetoric. I recently emailed the band, kindly asking them what they make of this. I have so far received no reply. Regardless of the band's own views, the lyrics to Werewolf Directive are more or less congruent with the rest of their own lyrics and artwork, which, while not explicitly racist or anti-Semitic, nevertheless use lupine symbols and the Wolfsangel. This includes their use of antiquity. Take their 2019 song, Restart Civilization. Quote, "Restart civilization, eradicate it all. Romulus bidding iron beginning," end quote. Romulus can be identified here as the proper founder of their conception of civilization, heralding a return to the Roman model through an apocalyptic war. One recalls the stoicizing paradigm of a new golden age emerging from cataclysm, integral to Augustus's putative restoration of Roman glory. Restart Civilization inspired the design of t-shirts that feature the Capitoline wolf, blood dripping from her jaws, suckling Romulus and Remus with a black sun radiating overhead. Just this past month, Diocletian released Live in Leipzig, a recording of a 2012 concert in Germany. Its artwork depicts an armored, winged werewolf wielding in its left hand a scepter topped by an eagle. While the eagle is a symbol of many things, the arc lightning that connects its wings suggests its association specifically with Jupiter, making it the symbol of Roman Imperium. In the werewolf's right hand is a world globe oriented with Europe in its center, on which continent stands the winged goddess Victory, carrying a laurel crown and a torch. The basis for this portrayal of Victory is the statue of her that graced the altar of Victory. Augustus installed the altar in the Senate House in 29 BCE to commemorate his victory over Antony and Cleopatra that won him sole command of Rome. Diocletian's lyrical themes of lycanthropy, Eurocentrism, and Roman revival combine seamlessly into a single image. Such evidence leads me to label the band as problematic with their evidence of associations with fascist imagery and people. I present this evidence neither to condemn this band nor to absolve it, but rather to start a conversation over how we should approach, evaluate, and consume this art. On that note, let me offer some concluding remarks. Far-right extremism comes in several forms, to many degrees of organization. This multifarious is reflected in metal artists who advance such views. While the vast majority of far-right bands do not explicitly appropriate classical antiquity, some of those that do have high profiles and relatively large fan bases in the metal underground. My purpose has been twofold. First, to raise awareness of how far-right metal bands participate in the discourse and iconography of right-wing extremist groups and of the alt-right movement across the globe. Second, to demonstrate how such artists commandeer Greco-Roman myth and history in service to their agendas. By claiming Greece and Rome as their exclusive inheritance, they reduce it to a Western monolith, perennially clashing with another monolith on the far side of the Bosporus. With misguided notions of its superiority, uniformity, and ideology, they transform classical civilization into a weapon, and it is the duty of antiquity scholars to strive to mitigate the harm this weapon can cause. The ancient Mediterranean, with all its rich diversity, intellectual and artistic triumphs, and atrocious flaws, belongs to all humanity as much as it reflects it. It is so much more than the bloody battles, white marble monuments, and great men that populate its picture in the minds of the artists here surveyed, a picture painted by outmoded historiographies and Hollywood movies. It has greater value in being understood than glorified, criticized than recommended. Its immense influence on the modern world should not be a cause for unexamined pride, but an opportunity to examine the legacy of institutions that have destroyed as much as created, oppressed as much as elevated. And besides, ancient history is metal as hell. Don't let these bastards ruin it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Swiss. That was so awesome. And I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Trusty to run the Q&A.
Yes, thank you again, Dr. Swiss. That was an excellent talk. I really appreciate all of the mentions as well to Latin, of course, and Roman civilization. So here's how we'll run the Q&A. If you have a question, you can see at the control panel that you have as a participant reactions. You can do one of two things. You can either put a question into chat. You can directly chat with me, the host, or any of the co-hosts. You can't chat with other participants. Or you can raise your hand. That's the other option, the reaction for raise hand. And I will give you permission to unmute individually. However, note that my finger is on the remove participant button. So you've been warned. So with that, are there any questions for Dr. Swiss? Let's start with Amanda. You now have permission to unmute.
Hello, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. My question is, okay, so in the classics, being anti-Christian is not exactly new. I'm COVID shielded, so I've spent a lot of time inside during this lockdown, and I've listened to audiobooks on The Rise and the Fall of the Roman Empire by Edward Gibbon, and Edward Gibbon is not a Christian fan. I would say he absolutely shits on them. So why do you think this is still perceived as being edgy? to be in the classics and being anti-Christian? Is it just cultural norms overarching? Why is this persisting when it's literally been done for hundreds of years?
Again, this goes back to those outmoded historiographies that have that inspire a lot of these bands. Gibbon is definitely still very influential. A lot of people, it still forms a lot of people's kind of conception of the fall of Rome and barbarians and Christianity and everything. Its legacy is. Gibbon's legacy is it dies hard, and it's particularly attractive to these bands, because it's right there. In fact, you might have seen it. I posted on Twitter. There's a silly video of Varg Vikernes, basically spewing basically what Gibbon said in less articulate fashion, where Vikernes was in prison saying to his interviewer that, the Romans, they adopted Christianity because they thought they could control people. There's, a lot of these people like Vikernes and these bands, they see Christianity as the force that destroyed the Roman Empire partly because Christianity was a Jewish foreign religion that made everybody weak and submissive, and that's why the barbarians took them over. And again, that has roots in Gibbon and the Enlightenment, and it's right out of that context that we get the white supremacist roots of classics as well. So it's all in this universe. So thanks for your question. I hope I addressed it well enough.
Excellent. Ready for the next one? Let's go with Christian. I'm going to unmute you now. Go for it.
Yes, thank you. If I understood correctly, you're making a distinction between music and lyrical content. My question is about the music. Are there riffs and melodies and instrumentals that echo like white supremacist or offensive songs? Like, can you do this language through instrument rather than lyric?
So two ways I'll address this. First, there are some songs that, like, I can think of some Satanic War Master songs that just play music from like Nazi rallies and stuff like that. When we're talking about like explicitly NSBM stuff. And then there's some bands that, use folk melodies or folk instruments, in order to evoke, their connections to their, pre-Christian pagan heritage. So there's sort of the folk traditional music aspects that they incorporate into the music. In terms of bands that are specifically black metal, the black metal style that was developed, in Norway and elsewhere around 1991, 92, it was developed deliberately as music that was anti-mainstream, that went against all of the traditional song structures and melodies, and really tried to evoke this sort of otherworldly atmosphere that would conjure kind of visions of the natural landscape of Scandinavia, and kind of the cold and the mist and everything. And it was designed to be very inaccessible music. And it's been sort of, so kind of think of the music that way. It's been sort of embraced as, this sort of anti-music that, is kind of anti-authority, the mainstream musical wise, even with regards to other genres of metal. And so that's why it's been, very palatable to people who would combine that musical style with such ideologies, such as Varg Vikernes did with his band Burzum, where he thought of, that the black metal movement was, about reclaiming, Norway from Christianity and Judaism in order to reestablish, the worship of Odin and the other Norse gods. Whereas a lot of other directions that black metal has evolved is more, it's a more nihilistic or misanthropic sort of kind of a general rebellion kind of approach that doesn't necessarily subscribe to anywhere on the political spectrum, because there's plenty of left-wing black metal bands that have rose to prominence lately, anarchist and far left and everything like that. So it's a style that is developed as a reaction to the mainstream, but is certainly can be used by people, all over the political spectrum. Thanks, Kristen.
All right. We have lots of questions, both in chat and hands up. So I'm going to pick one from the chat, if it's okay with you. This is from Nicholas. He asks, can you elaborate or repeat on the concept of discipline for NSBM? Adherence to discipline crops up in other extreme underground genres, so I'd love to hear more.
Yeah. So, especially bands, these far right bands, especially when they talk about Sparta, they are definitely, looking into kind of the this prescription of state-sponsored education to create warriors, as they do in Sparta. So we've seen some examples of that, but generally, that's, I think, that's a more general phenomenon in especially NSBM and the black metal scene at large. This sort of rejection of the sensuality of more traditional metal styles. So, if you think of glam metal or just heavy metal in the 70s and 80s, where they're celebrating, uninhibited sex and drugs and rock and roll and whatnot, and alcohol and all of that. And then black metal really was a reaction to that lifestyle as well. And so they thought that in order to be, a proper, fully, manly man, like your ancestors, you would be, above those temptations. So I think there is continuity here with the musical genre going into these ideologies in that regard. And so the idea of Spartan discipline is certainly attractive to not just, the Greek bands, but others.
Excellent. Ready for another?
Sure.
All right. How about Del? I'm going to unmute you, Del. Go ahead.
Oh boy.
Great. Thanks so much, Jeremy. This is wonderful. Since you're a philologist, I have a question about language. It seems, since you didn't mark any information about translation, that a lot of these songs were originally written in English. Mm-hmm. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. Is that the case that most metal is in English? And if so, how do these authors square that fact with attitudes towards nationalism? Because language, especially sort of given the relationship all of this has to 19th century theories about linguistics and their relationship to these ideas, seems relevant.
Yeah, great question. So first off, lots of increasing number of bands that, especially in Europe but elsewhere, that sing about their heritage, do sing in their own native languages. There's plenty of examples of that. A lot of folk metal bands, especially, and black metal bands, and plenty others. On the other hand, English has been the lingua franca of heavy metal since its inception. I think just matching, because it was the lingua franca. Otherwise, it was a way of the metal scene to transcend, countries. And so even bands that, who are not actually that very good at English still write English lyrics in order to be more accessible to an international fan base. And for these bands on the political extremes, singing in English is another way of making their message accessible to other fans. For example, Der Stürmer, they sing in English so that people in the rest of Europe can read it. Though they also have a few songs, at least with song titles in German, simply for evoking that associative value. So there's both going on.
Thank you.
Yep.
Great. Maybe one more from chat.
Okay.
So about gender issues, I notice a lot of masculine language in the lyrics. Are there women involved in these bands as fans? And can you talk about gender in this general area?
That's a great question. As far as I can tell, I have not come across any far right bands that have women members. That doesn't mean that there aren't any. I haven't looked at the rosters of all of them, but this is definitely a scene in which the gender disproportion is even greater than in metal in general. In metal in general, the gender ratio is moving toward equality, but is still disproportionately male. And in several subgenres of metal, that sort of emphasis on constructing specifically the masculine gender is predominant, but especially in black metal and National Socialist black metal, where I think a lot of this misogyny is there. It's like you don't even really, the lyrics of these bands, I don't even recall any mention of women at all. They're just invisible. As for fans, again, there are certainly plenty of women who are fans of these bands, but again, as I said, the vast majority of people who listen and consume music by these far-right bands are not themselves sympathetic to their ideologies. It's really, what's really going on is, most people are willing to, again, either separate the art from the artist, or just basically just not be bothered by it, because they just because they think what matters to them is the music, especially in these sort of genres where the lyrics are barely intelligible. They are able to listen to the music without necessarily hearing these messages intelligibly, and so that's an ongoing sort of discussion in the scene among metal academics as well as the general population.
Yeah, that's interesting. Thank you. So we still have lots of questions. I am going to put in chat one of the people in the room suggested a book that was recently released about multilingual metal. And so I've put that in chat for everyone who might be interested in that one. But Jeremy, how you feeling? You want one more?
There is a chapter on Latin in that book.
Very nice.
Which is worth looking at. Yeah.
Very nice. Well, it looks like Paul is up next, so I'll unmute him, and my dog will chime in as well. Go ahead, Paul, if you have a question. I think we lost Paul. So sorry, dogs. John, I believe you are next in the line. So here we go.
Jeremy, awesome talk. Really liked it. Question I had, going back a little bit, I remember you posting on social media saying Diocletian, a band I know we both like, was problematic. That prompted me to dig out my copy of their split with Weregoat, and I found the Wolfsongle on it.
Mm-hmm.
I guess my question for you is, how can we have this discussion about consuming this problematic content, as you dubbed it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's, I sort of, left that as open discussion. Again, I emailed the band about, their connection to Pete Helmkamp. They haven't gotten back to me either because they don't want to, or they just don't check their email or whatnot. So I'm at this moment kind of suspending judgment on that, but it's tricky because a lot of because the Wolfsangel is not, existed in Germany before the Nazis appropriated it. Okay, it goes back to the Middle Ages. So, it's one of those tricky symbols that is often associated with, the extremists, but is not inherently like that. And, people say that about the swastika as well, but the swastika is so, tainted that people tend to stay away. So yeah, I don't have, easy answers for a question like that. How do we approach this music? The fact that what I tried to sort of suggest is the fact that, the lyrics that Helmkamp wrote seem to be consistent with the rest of what Diocletian wrote. But if they didn't have that song, then I wouldn't call Diocletian problematic necessarily, because lots of bands flirt with this type of imagery, and it's not always meant to be read as, oh, they're card carrying Nazis or whatnot. It kind of goes back to the early punk thing with this is transgression for its own sake. That's going on here, and but it's hard to tell because the band might present one message but then tell you that it means something else than what it says, and there's a lot of gaslighting going on as well, so it's tricky. But thanks for I don't think that was a very satisfactory answer, but it's something I'm still wrestling with that I'd love to have continued discussions with people about.
So don't go throwing out my Where Go Diocletian split just yet.
Yeah, I mean, if you already, I used to be the person who would, separate art from artists and all of that. And so I have some of that material myself, and, I've looked at it for academic purposes, but, and the other thing is that I'm just here to present, information about these bands. I'm not, telling people to, think a certain way, or I'm not advocating censorship. I'm just letting people decide for themselves whether they want to continue consuming this music based on the evidence that I presented. So.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Yep. Thanks, John.
All right, so we are unfortunately out of time. However, there are a ton of questions in chat. So I'm going to save the chat and send it to Dr. Swist. Additionally, those of you with your hands up, if you want to put your email address in chat and send it to me, I will send that to Dr. Swist as well and have him reach out to you. Dr. Swist, anything else you'd like to leave us with before we adjourn tonight?
I don't know, if you let my parents screen share, they might be able to show people their cats, but fortunately I don't have any here, but
excellent. Well, I've got a few of, I think, your family's cats running around here. Someone's family's cats are running around my own house. So yes, this was Zoom, this is recorded, and so we will eventually put it on the University of Iowa's Classics YouTube page, I believe is where we were going to put it. So stay tuned for that. I'm sure that Dr. Swist will be happy to share the link once it's available. Excellent. So with that, thank you all for joining us. And I deem this session of Little Things closed. Have a wonderful evening, everybody. Goodbye. hold on for just a second. I'm going to put everyone in the waiting room that's not leaving. Oh, it's taking a while. Put in waiting room. Put in waiting room. I'm only keeping people that I know. Put in waiting room.
Wait, keep James Swist.
I am. Okay. Now I can, hold on. Start video. You guys can start your videos now, and you can unmute yourselves now if you want. And I'm going to